This is a meeting that is being attended only by remote participation. If there are any members of the community that happen to have logged into this meeting, welcome. There will be no community comments done at this meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to start our process of budgeting for next year. This is obviously a very difficult time for us to budget because we don't know what impact the COVID-19 is going to have on revenues across our city and across the state. It's obvious that it's going to have tremendously negative impact for probably a couple of quarters at least in areas that are important to the city, such as tourism and restaurants. So it's not something that is going to be a positive impact for sure, but at this point, what we can't tell is how much of a negative impact it's going to be, and we can't tell how much positive may come out of people shopping more at Fry's and Albertsons, or shopping more online and doing it in a manner that gets us some tax revenue from the online transactions. So there may be some small positives that are also unknown. If we go back in our history, I know the Vice Mayor and Councilman Romack will remember that we've been through this before in terms of how to deal with this as a council, how to deal with the uncertainty in terms of revenues, and how to try to lead the city and the city's staff forward in a way that maintains our financial sustainability and our financial condition as much as possible, while at the same time meeting the needs of the staff and allowing the staff and enabling the staff to meet the needs of our citizens. It's not an easy process, but it's one that we can get through if we just work together and have a common goal. The goal that we had before, because of the way government finance works, we are presented with a dilemma. If we were to act as responsibly as we could from a fiscal standpoint in adopting this budget, then we would end up with a budget that was very, very lean and that maintained, as much as possible, maintained our city reserves and spent money to operate the city that we really knew we could count on generating through our normal ongoing revenue. The problem with that approach in adopting a budget is that the budget number that we end up adopting ends up being a hard cap. So if revenues end up being better than what we expect, we have great difficulty and maybe not even the possibility of being able to spend money above that budget cap. Or if something comes up of an emergency nature, and even if we have the funds, we may not have the budget capacity to spend those funds. So we have conflicting goals that we have to meet. The way that we did it in the past was probably not the best way, but it was a way that worked, and that was we adopted a budget that was designed to allocate as much money as the state revenue cap would permit us to have. So if the state revenue cap was $9 million, then we budgeted to spend $9 million. But then we also informally adopted what we called a managed to budget, and that budget was one in which we asked the staff to manage their areas to a lower number. And that lower number might, in the case of, if we assumed that the overall cap was 9 million, the lower number might have been 8 million or 7.8 million, something like that. And staff then was challenged to try to meet the lower number and still be able to supply the essential services to our community. That served us well, but in today's environment, we have a different way of doing that same thing, and it's part of what we're going to need to work on as we go through this budget. And that is, instead of having a managed to number that's smaller, we end up adopting a budget that is reasonably lean, and then we put in contingencies department by department as appropriate, so that the overall number we budget is larger, but the difference is made up between what we want the staff to manage to and contingency funds that we allocate so that they can be spent if we need to spend them, or if it turns out that we obtain more revenue than what we anticipate. So it's not going to necessarily be an easy process. I believe, and I've got Lars sitting right here, and maybe he can respond to this, but I believe the budget numbers that he's put together in the materials that's been provided to you are more of a budget of what we would spend based upon having normal increases in each of the departments, and not necessarily a lean budget. So we're going to need to go through, as we go through this budget, and we're going to have to, number one, we need to decide as a council, do we want to adopt the idea of trying to come up with a reasonable lean budget, and then supplementing that through contingency accounts that would allow us to spend more if we have more. So that's the first discussion that we need to have within the council before we start this process of reviewing the budget. So with that, I'll open it up to comments or questions. And I don't know an easy way to do this because I don't have everybody's face on the page. Maybe I'll just go down through the ones in the order that I see them. So the first face that I see is Ron Claire. Councilman Claire, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Well, I think, no, I think I just want to kind of listen and see the experience and see what we think we should do and kind of jump in there. To be honest with you, this is kind of my first rodeo with this, so I want to listen and learn.
All right, how about Councilman Brainerd Watson? Is she muted? Oh, there you go. No, we've muted her again. There we go.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, it looks like.
Yes, you're fine now.
Okay, yeah, I like your approach. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm, along with Ron, kind of a newbie at this still, so I yield to your experience. I think this is something we've never faced, so we're just gonna have to work our way through it, like your approach.
Okay, Councilwoman Donahue.
I concur. I also go with sort of rookie status, and we'll listen to the veterans in the group.
Councilman Rostosi.
No questions yet, sir.
All right. Vice Mayor Faith.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. In the past, we've learned that if our budget is too small and something happens, we need to buy property, we need to fix or repair something, and we don't have something built in the budget to do it, we've got some problems trying to get very creative. Having a budget that is kind of in line with what we would have expected had not this virus shown up is probably the way to go, but having a really good understanding and maybe a written managed to budget of where we think we're probably really going to be. We can watch both of them as time goes by. And we do have the project going on with the city center where we'd like to see something happen. This may have slowed it down, but we need to have some flexibility in case we do start doing something over there in the budget to spend some money.
Okay, I'm not sure if we have Councilman Romack or not. I have his name, but I don't see his, oh, there he is.
Yes, you do.
Councilman Romack, you have comments?
Yeah, first of all, not any in-depth comment like the Vice Mayor, but I would like to thank Lars. This is probably the most understandable and easy read of a budget that we've had over the past 10, 15 years. So I want to really congratulate him for all his work and his efforts. So thank you.
Okay, well, with that, we'll turn this over to Lars, and we'll get started going through it in whatever method he thinks is most efficient.
Can I
Thank you,
just
Mayor.
make a question? For some reason, are there anybody
Sure.
who's trying to come in up on my
Who is
computer?
this?
Are they showing on
Is this-
everybody else's?
Is this Councilman Brainerd Watson?
Yeah.
Okay. What was your
Do I
question?
have to? Well, for some reason or other, it looks like Mary Dixon was trying to get in. I don't know if she's in now or not, but it's like they're asking if we want to admit her, and it's coming to my computer. I don't think I'm in charge of that, am I? Or do I need to be watching for that?
It's because I'm one of the hosts, and then I'm screen sharing, so you can see what's happening on my screen.
Ah, okay, perfect.
It's coming on yours, but it's here.
So we'll just let it go.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council, city staff that have joined, and perhaps any members of the public. I am Lars Johnson, Director of Finance for City Litchfield Park. Thanks so much for joining. So this evening, my thoughts are, I've prepared a presentation which I've sent out to Council ahead of time, basically dividing the presentation into 5 areas. I plan to be brief, but still cover the kind of the main things I feel like Council should keep in mind when we're getting into the budget process. The first 3 items, I think will take about 30 minutes, and that'll be a lot of me talking, but feel free at any time, Mayor, to have comments.
And if the council has questions as we're going through here, just, I'm not sure how we're gonna do this, because I can only see 2 or 3 pictures at a time, and I have no control over whose pictures they are. So, just make some kind of a reasonable sound, and we'll get time, we'll break and have questions as we go through this.
Excellent. So first thing I'm going to talk about is the timeline, kind of the legal adoption process that the City Council will go through to get the budget adopted. Then right off the bat, I'd like to talk about, as the Mayor alluded to, this unusual circumstance we're in with some impacts to our budget with coronavirus, and then talk about the budget as was originally presented to you. And as you know, I also gave a second option that may be more something you'd like to adopt. We've also planned or scheduled another workshop that would occur a week from today if needed, and it's totally up to how fast we get through material, and up to Council's pleasure in that regard. The department heads have been asked to join as well, so when we get into their budgets, they should, provided the Mayor allows it, should be available to answer any questions. The vision, as we all know, however, this year when I was reading this vision, somehow this word together stood out at me, and I think we've been talking about how it's a difficult time for everyone, and together we can get through it and make good decisions for the community. The fundamental purpose of the city's budget is to link what we want to accomplish for the community, and that is definitely stated here in the vision. So the budget process, a lot has happened in the background to get to this point. On February 6th, we had our staff level kickoff. There's been various deadlines to get the operating budget complete, the capital request due and complete. We've also had a review with each department head and city manager and finance to go over the budget and make changes as the city manager felt was necessary. You'll notice, though, that all this happened basically just before we finished the budget, just before all of this COVID really came to light as far as how it's impacting our. So what you received was prepared ahead of that. However, there's been some revisions to the revenue side of things. Again, this is a fluid schedule, but we do have 2 days planned for the workshops. And then once we get to the actual legal adoption of the budget, there's a 3-prong approach. I plan to have these all on your regular council meetings in the months of May, June, and July, so that regular meetings wouldn't necessarily need to be organized. Special meetings. First, we'd have to adopt a tentative budget, and that would be the maximum total amount that the budget would be for the city. From there, you can always decrease into the final budget. There will be public hearings for the city budget, the SLIDs, which is our streetlight improvement districts, and our CFD. At the same time, on the 17th, after the public hearing, we will adopt the budgets. And then on the 15th, after a minimum of 14 days, we can then adopt the tax levies that will be set to pay the debt service for the CFD, the Community Facilities District at the villages, and then to pay the electricity in the streetlight improvement districts. With that, I'll jump over into what I'm calling is economic uncertainty, and that's definitely, as the mayor's already alluded to. So we are expecting a loss of revenue, the extent of which we don't know. And the reason is there's a 5 to 6 week normal delay for reporting by businesses. So for example, was it the third week of March when the business closures happened? Someone went to purchase something the end of March from a local business. That business turns around and reports to the Department of Revenue with a deadline of April 20th. And then there's a lead time for the Department of Revenue to finalize all of that month's collections and give us the reports. So we won't know about March until the beginning of May. Of course, that was a partial closure month. And then April, which I think will be our biggest hit month, we won't know until the beginning of June. And then, as we just heard, the governor extended the stay-at-home order to May 15th, so the losses will be likely as well in May. And even then, the economic recovery is unknown how fast everything can come back. But so really, beginning of July, we won't know. At the beginning of July, we will know the fourth quarter of this fiscal year. So we're budgeting with an unknown future. The way I view that is that we'll definitely have to monitor the situation closely as the fiscal year progresses. We'll adopt a budget, but council always has the ability to amend budgets mid-year, just between funds and departments, but the overall cap, the total dollar amount, is something we cannot exceed. So having a contingency that council can allocate to various things is what we'll definitely need to have.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is Tom. Hey, Lars, I'm just curious, given the lag time with the tax revenue issue, is it possible for the city to reach out to some of our key players as far as our tax revenue base is concerned, perhaps Friday once April's done, just to get a sense for what their revenues look like in April, so we can maybe get a head start on understanding the impact?
I think that's an excellent question. I feel like we definitely could reach out. I've thought of that myself, and it's a matter of whether they're willing to share that information with us, but we could reach out.
I guess my thought was, Lars, that I would guess there's probably 5 or less key players that would give us a good sense for what the impact was to us. And if they could just, even if they don't give us a specific number, if they could just give us an idea if they're down 10% or down 50% or down 90% or up 50% or whatever, it might give you a sense for what the impact is.
Yes. There's a challenge. Yep, there's a question.
Question, Vice Mayor.
Yeah. Tom, I had asked Lars to crunch some numbers, maybe he'll get to that. And just to kind of get a really, really basic understanding of what may be happening. And that was to presume the hotels were shut down, the restaurants are operating at 20% capacity, and the grocery stores are operating at about 110% of capacity of historic. What do those numbers look like on the effect to our budget? And he came back and told me that we had probably in April about a $300,000 negative, May it's $200,000, June 130,000. We're getting into the summer months, which is when our revenues would go down anyway on some of our bigger players. So, I mean, that's a semi-bright spot.
Yeah, and that what I was going to say is there's a challenge as a city finance director. Just so council is aware, I won't be able to, per state guidelines, I won't be able to share individual business information, but I can aggregate things into categories, and that's what I can communicate.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right.
So there's a few things about the city of Litchfield Park that are very positive that will help us get through this difficult time. And what I'm seeing is there's a lot of flexibility in the current financial stability that the city has. And that is basically, as we've been communicating monthly to council, there's a significant fund balance. Right now, we're projecting an ending of $11.3 million in the general fund. That includes the $4.2 million that's been designated in the two reserve categories, including a stabilization fund that's basically designed for this type of a thing, for unexpected revenue loss or expenditure increases. The other two components are the $2.9 million that we reserve for the debt payoff. And then over and above all of those three categories, there's $4.2 million unassigned. In relation to this total city operating budget of about $8 million. So there's a lot of flexibility in that situation. Although the fund balance has been designed, or we've been accumulating it to accomplish big capital projects, as the city has already been given direction to keep an eye on capital projects and postponing them, that also frees up cash for a situation like this. I'm also recommending that the city not pay off the debt, and that's definitely something the city council can discuss. But with the unknown circumstance, having that reserve is better than paying it off, in my opinion.
One of the other things that we need to get a sense of council about is our capital program. We have some very large projects that are coming up, one of which is the wall along Litchfield Road from the canal up to Bird Lane. That project is ready to be bid, and I instructed the city manager not to put it out to bid until we made a decision as a council on whether we wanted to defer those kinds of projects until we understood our financial situation a little bit better. I also told him that we should continue to move forward on road projects that we can, actually I didn't characterize it specifically as road, but any capital project that we can fund out of our HERF account. We have very significant balances in our HERF money that is limited in terms of what it can be used for. It cannot help us in the general fund expenses, but it can do a variety of road programs and things that are directly tied to the roads. So I need council to think about that, and I don't know we necessarily need anything today other than if you have a strong feeling one way or the other, you're welcome to express it. But it's my belief that we should be trying to preserve our general fund balance, again, until we understand the situation a lot better, but that this is a good time to spend those HERF monies that have been sitting there, because they really aren't doing us any good as cash when they could be doing us good on the road projects. So if there are comments now, or if there are comments throughout the meeting, or you're welcome to wait and do it the next time we have our budget session, which is a week, I think. So,
Mayor.
Vice Mayor. Yeah, I got it. I keep losing everybody. I have to keep switching back and forth.
Can you see me, Tom? Yeah.
Yeah, I can now.
Okay. The HERF funds, I think we had contemplated maybe using that doing the city center project, a lot of that. But maybe we need to sit back and think that this problem we have here probably will not just go away in a very, very short period of time. The hit that's going to be seen is going to be very, very long term, and maybe the HERF funds might be used all or part at some point for our normal road maintenance projects, which would free up some of the funds out of the general fund. We would maybe think about putting toward that road projects.
No, I agree with you 100%. In fact, the only thing that the specific project that I was urging the staff to continue was there's a project over in the peninsula that is related to the roads in the peninsula, And I believe, I've gotten a couple different views in terms of whether that project can be funded with HERF, but the last I heard was that we thought that it could be funded with HERF. And so that would be the type of project that we'd want to use those HERF funds. It's a critical issue for the residents within the peninsula, certainly if it rains really hard again. And if it's something we can go ahead and complete and use a grant that we have from the county, then it would make sense for us financially to do that, particularly if we can do it with HERF funds. So it's in terms of trying to use our HERF funds strategically, I was not thinking of it in terms of doing something significant necessarily in the city center, because the whole city center is one that is going to be probably impacted very negatively by this COVID-19 situation. And so we're going to need to look at our whole timeline of how this is all going to come together.
And Mayor, if I may, as we watch this thing go with the price of oil the way it is, and we buy a lot of asphalt, so the cost of that asphalt will probably go down. So maybe in 6 to 12 months we'll find some kind of bargains that we haven't seen before, and maybe we want to dump some money into the roads at that point. That wall, we may also see the construction costs go down significantly in 6 to 12 months, and if we do have, it's going to be a balancing act. If we have the cash and see the cost down, if we think we can spare the cash, we pull the plug and do it. So we need to build that in the budget just in case that we do see an opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to try to budget and run the city as lean as we can and still deliver the value that our residents expect. But we need to put in contingencies so that we have the ability to spend money if in turn it turns out that we have a good reason to do it. Councilman Donahue.
So HERF funds, do we receive X amount of money annual? How does that, are we at 1.2 now? Do we receive a deposit?
It
What's
comes
that?
from the state. It's state shared revenue that comes from the gas tax, essentially. It's a little bit of there's called a VLT, of vehicle licensing tax. There's a little bit of money in it from that, but mostly it's gas tax.
And so we receive that every July, or what's the deposit schedule?
It's a monthly distribution.
It was
based
what?
on actual
monthly.
Monthly. All right.
We get some every month.
Okay.
Okay.
So, any other questions? I can't see hands for sure. I don't
Can
think
I
so.
ask a
All
quick
right.
question?
Yes. Who is this?
I don't know whether or not anyone's talked to any of our legislators, to see whether or not they might be looking to try and push through some legislation opening that HERF fund up a little bit to let it be used for alternative purposes. And I don't know who would be the appropriate person to reach out to, but I thought that might be something at least worth investigating. And then I was wondering, last time we met, we approved, I believe it was last time, redoing the Camelback Park. Has that all been paid for, purchased, bought, all of that good stuff? Or could that also be shelved for a little bit at a time?
We have pulled the trigger, so to speak, on that, and it's playground equipment. I think the number was about $70,000, and it's going to happen in the next several weeks. Okay, Lars, do you want to continue?
Sure. Just to respond a little bit about HERF, that's actually a constitutional requirement, so it's not just the legislation as well. So that would be just for your information. And currently, in the HERF fund, we have over $1 million, just over $1 million. I'll get into some more details about that later on. So the second kind of extremely positive thing about the city right now and the situation it's in is that over the years, last few years, the operating revenues have been exceeding our operating expenditures. And so that means we could weather a significant drop in revenue before you start having to utilize savings to pay for operations. And that's called the structural deficit if your operating expenditures are exceeding the money you take in on an ongoing basis. So that's definitely something that's a positive, and I'll show you a graph here next. And so basically since fiscal 2015, that situation has been occurring. And just in the general fund in fiscal 19, the operating revenues exceeded operating expenditures by $2 million. We're projecting in the general fund that we'll still be, 1.5 million over operating expenditures. So what's happened is that we've been able to accumulate a lot of funds in the fund balance over the last few years. But what I was saying is that even if we take a big hit to our revenue, it's going to be up to a 20% decrease, and we'll still be okay. Now, we don't know what that, it could be that we're going to exceed that 20%. That's why we're going to have to monitor the situation. But Litchfield is in a positive situation compared to several other communities out there where they operate on a more tighter situation. So any immediate hit to the revenues means they have to react much sooner. This is just a reminder. I'm sure you all know that the revenues are heavily driven by taxes in the city, which is driven by consumer activity in businesses. Basically, 81% of the total operating revenue is from tax, both local sales taxes and state shared revenue. And here's a little bit about the trends of our sales tax. Since the last recession, actually, I put in from 07 to 08. And by the way, this does exclude construction sales tax, so it's more of our operating type sales tax revenue. The first big decrease in the last recession, we had a 25% decrease. And then it climbed up to 7%, down another negative 2%, and then stayed flat for a little while, and then it started increasing again. In fiscal 17 is where you see the Litchfield marketplace development start to come on, and revenues really take off from there. Basically, since 07, you could say we've doubled the revenue in that category in sales tax. I would say this is a positive thing in that you also have more general merchandise type of revenue in the city that can help in a situation like this. As the Vice Mayor mentioned, it could be that our retail, our Fry's, Albertsons, CVS, those types of stores are actually seeing an increase over a significant portion of the closures that we've had as people stock up. I think there still will be a decrease. Of course, this is all speculation. Anyway, I wanted to give a sort of a trend of what we've seen over the last few years.
Can I make a comment real quick?
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Mayor.
This chart here, I think, is really, really important for those of you that are going to be in the council longer than the mayor and I. We have fought to make sure that we grow the commercial faster than we grow any residential. The residential costs us, the commercial contributes to our bottom lines. And if we can grow the commercial and we can continue this graph that Lars is showing us here, the services we can give to all the existing residents will even get better and better and better as years go by. And when these dips in the economies happen, we can be sitting in a situation we're sitting in now, which is actually, it seems pretty good for a very bad situation. So I fought this battle for years, pushing the commercial and slowing down the residential. And this is what happens when we do that. This graph is a great explanation of that. Thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, go ahead, continue.
Councilwoman Donahue had her hand up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, it took me too long. So here's my question, because we don't, other than what Sun Health wants to do, we really don't have any other residential plots, do we? Or we don't have, mainly what we have left is commercial with a little bit in the city center, and is that correct?
Yeah, you've got obviously potential for residential if we depending on how the zoning issues go on the land across the street owned by JDM. And then you've got a potential for almost 1,000 residents up at La Loma. I think if the number, I think that's the number, at least I remember.
Okay,
And
just,
if I may, every piece of commercial we have at one point or another, we have been pushed to attempt to convert it to residential. And we did agree to that behind the Fries to convert that commercial into residential. We still have all the property out on El Mirage and Camelback also. See what happens with that. You know, you may get a push someday to put apartments out there. You know, who knows? Yeah, I mean, I would just like to see us all stay strong on attempting to resist the things that are eating away at the revenues and lean toward the things that create our, you know, keep our lifestyle, but create the revenue so we can give more services to the citizens.
Okay.
At this slide, I also wanted to mention that these last two bars here, the estimated fiscal 20 and then the 21 projected columns, those have been revised since the COVID situation is upon us. We were trending at 11% over fiscal 19, and now with the last 3 months being very expected to be very poor, it's actually putting us at a equal or slightly negative to last year. So these numbers are, I guess, you can say educated guesses. They're at least an attempt to revise our revenue projections. I'll show you in a little bit what that means by month for the sales tax. But I just wanted to make a point that we are looking at our revenues and decreasing that. And this is in our overall budget numbers that I've given you. These revenues have been adjusted. These are the categories that were expected, and these are all in the general fund. So our local sales tax, our state shared sales tax. You'll notice the income tax was not decreased, and that's because that distribution is based on 2 years prior. So that's always a firm number. The state distributes the income tax that was collected from 2 years ago. But of course, we'll see that decrease over the next couple of years if a recession does come upon us. The vehicle license tax is one that is expected to decrease. I have some information about each one of these categories in a future slide.
Vehicle license tax is HERF.
Yeah, that's not actually HERF, but it's
Not HERF.
Yeah.
HERF is in there or not?
This is general fund only. I didn't.
Oh, I see. Okay. This is a part of that goes in general fund.
Yeah.
All right.
So the recreation charges for services, that has been recalculated by your staff. So when we were expecting to be at 455,000, now we're expecting at 325,000. That's with, you know, the last quarter of this fiscal year being basically closed over there. Some slowdown in building permits is expected, and then of course the interest rates have tanked as well, so our interest revenue will be decreasing as well. So what that looks like on a monthly collection basis for our sales tax, you can see on this far left column, that's the percent increase over the previous fiscal year. We are trending, like I said, at 11%. The last 3 months have been decreased, and you can see that the numbers I put in here is that's a 33% decrease, 43% decrease, and then 27 for June, which is May's transactions. So what we were really helped by the fact that revenues were coming in so well up to this point for this fiscal year, and then we're hit with the decrease for the fourth quarter. We've also revised revenue projections for the next fiscal year. Again, these are educated guesses at this point. Here's a little more information about the state shared revenue. Each one of these categories will be impacted if this recession continues. The state share TPT is that 5.6% you're paying when you buy things. 25% of that is shared out to the out to the incorporated cities. Then state income tax, I already mentioned that one. Vehicle license is about, it's money collected on licensing of motor vehicles. So as fewer motor vehicles are purchased and licensed, that revenue also will decrease. And then our HERF revenue, which is restricted, we've talked about, that comes from your gasoline tax as well as some other fees that go into that pool. This is the last slide of this section, and just some ideas I put on there council can discuss if they would like. Some ways that can temporarily deal with this unknown situation, and that would be things like hiring and wage freeze, delaying capital expenditures. As the mayor mentioned, it may not make sense to slow down on the HERF projects, but general fund projects is what this is about. You could just direct staff to cease any non-essential expenditures. And then for the next year's budget, we can move any increase that's been requested into a contingency that would require council to then authorize to redistribute to the departments.
Mayor, I have a quick.
I'm sorry, I wasn't looking. Councilman Donahue.
She's on mute.
You got to unmute yourself.
So
There you go.
HERF funds are going to be affected as well if it comes from gas tax. People aren't driving, people aren't filling up. I mean, that's going to happen as well, I would guess.
I mean, one of the good things is that it's not a percent of the sales price, it's a set amount. So
Okay.
it doesn't change if the cost of gasoline goes down.
Or the use or the volume.
It goes down if there's a volume. It's a per gallon charge. So it will probably be affected, but it's not as volatile as you might think.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the next section is I want to briefly go over the budget proposal as a summary before we get into department details. Again, this is what was handed out in the budget packet, showing a 5% increase in operating, totaling about $400,000. Our capital is increasing by 100%, and we can look at the capital projects that makes up that number, but what drives that is a lot of city center projects that have been put into the next year's budget. And then these two other contingency lines have been added to increase basically our budget to closer to the state-imposed limitation. As you see on the bottom, the state calculates what the city's maximum can be for the year, and that's $19,755,604. The sources areas where is how we're balancing that budget, how we expect to pay for it. If we were to spend the whole budget, obviously we have a lot of contingency and capital in there, but how will we pay for that? So you notice the ongoing revenue is $10.1 million, which exceeds the operating expenditure budget. And then there's a one-time revenue. What I put in there was our construction sales tax revenue as well as potential sale of property. And now this may have to be revised, but that's what's in there now. And then there's a city center contingency, and so that $1 million means that if we were to get additional revenue in from the city center, then we could spend that matching $1 million in the expenditure side. To balance the budget, though, we're projecting to use $5.7 million of fund balance that's sitting in the city's coffers. That's accumulated over the last several years. It's one-time money, so it's okay to use for projects, but basically because our capital is so robust, that's what's needed to balance it. What I compiled on this next slide is basically what the big ticket, what's driving the operating increase. And this is something that I think council could have some discussion on, because these are really, the other increases in the departments are very minor, 1,000 here, 1,000 there, but these are the things that are really driving that 5% increase in the operating side. I've highlighted the numbers I feel like are more discretionary in nature, and these things, given the new situation, may be better to put into the contingency line rather than budget in the departments. So there's been a request from the Public Works Department for 2 full-time Public Works employees. The total of those 2 is $132,400. Before all of this happened, we were proposing to council that we would budget for a 2% cost of living increase and a 2% merit increase. And those 2 are listed. Then there's MCSO contract. The numbers they've given us is that the contract will increase by $63,370. Goodyear Fire's contract is projected to increase as well by $68,263. The health insurance trust that we're in, it's the Arizona Metropolitan Trust. It's made up of several other cities. They've voted to increase the premium to balance, the money that the trust needs to have to remain sound. That increase for our city is $60,000 in the employer's share of the premium. There's some city clerk's office personnel requests. Our city engineering department, being that we made an action mid-year this fiscal year to hire an in-house engineer, we have to increase the budget in that area. And then there's a $50,000 Loma Homestead maintenance increase, and this is it's a line item in the Public Works Department that would allow for more money to be spent to maintain the Loma Homestead campus. And then some other requests from the Public Works Department. All of the highlighted items here total about $417,000. So basically, as I sent the memo out yesterday, but this would be an option that council could look at this point, and that's moving those highlighted items out of the departments and putting them in under contingency. That would allow us to have, basically a flat operating budget. And then we would boost up the contingency slightly more to get us close to what the imposed expenditure limitation is. I'll pause here if there's any discussion around these slides.
Questions or discussion,
Question.
comment? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. The $68,000 Goodyear Fire increase, the first I've heard of that. Where did that come from?
We reached out to Goodyear Fire to provide us with an estimate for the next year's contract, and that's based on the numbers they've given us.
Is that in line with the long-term contract we've had with the city?
Yes. Yeah, I'm kind of struggling to remember the details of the contract at this point, but as I reviewed it, it was in compliance. They're allowed a CPI increase, as well as, I believe, the actual personnel costs increase. They're allowed that as well.
And I think you've got different things that are impacting fire and police, but one of the major one is the increase in pension costs because of the unfunded liabilities in this PSPRS system. So that's probably a big part of that 68,000. Probably, I'm going to guess most all of it's all related to somehow related to personnel costs.
And Mayor, you were head of our Fire Safety Commission before you became mayor and worked on that contract. Is that what we were expecting to have, you think, at this point? We haven't seen it increase really much at all, I don't think at all, since we've had that contract.
Well, it's been going up.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone up every year particularly because of personnel issues. I haven't seen this, but how this workup, I haven't seen the actual workup that came up with that 68,000. So I can't comment on whether it's all in line with what we've had in the past, but I'm going to suspect that it is. Personnel costs are going up very significantly in fire and police both. And we're seeing that now translated into both of our contracts with MCSO and Goodyear because of not only the cost of the employees, just their hourly rates, but also the makeup pension liability costs are substantial.
Okay, thank you.
And the IGA does provide for annual adjustments based on merit pay increases and market rate adjustments, and that's your biggest one.
Yeah.
Councilor Romack.
Thank you. Before Brian left, I thought that we had approved getting 2 full-time public works employees. Is this 2 more in addition to what we approved, or is this just that same process?
This would be two more in addition to what was approved last year.
It's one of those things we'll go through as we, with department heads and the city manager to understand what these increases relate to. So some of them are easy. We know what 2% merit and 2% cost of living means, but we don't know what the city clerk's office wants to do with personnel. We don't know, these full-time public works employees or maintenance costs within public works. So we're going to have to get the department heads and or other staff along with the city manager to explain the details of all that.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yeah.
as in
Mr.
years
Vice
past,
Mayor.
we're going to go, department by department through this budget.
They haven't told me yet, Mr. Vice Mayor, so we'll see. We'll see how it works, and then if we're not happy with it, we'll change it.
Okay. Well, I just see a bunch of expenses that maybe, back to the 2008 days, we may be looking at, not putting in the winter grass and some other things here, which would give some more public works guys availability and some other stuff we can do to kind of work through this.
And we're going to have to talk through probably in more detail than what we might have wanted to do.
And we'll have a pool shut down for some period of time too, so.
Yeah, it's going to be shut down for a while. I don't know, but it's hard to tell what the governor's going to do with the pool. I would expect that it'll open, but we'll see.
Mayor, so I have a question about the La Loma Homestead and the additional $50,000 that's showing there. So was that to clean up the entire hill, or my concern is, what if the Historical Society's raised a couple $1 million, they want to raise another $1 million, but say they have enough and they start going and they start building, how much of that is going to have to be spent in order for us to clean up that portion?
Again, we're going to have to find out from what Public Works, in terms of what their intention was when they put this in. But I'm going to tell you, my assumption is that the money that we've been spending on the hill in the past has not permitted our Public Works Department to keep the hill in a safe condition. I don't know. I'm assuming that we had so many bees in the dance floor area and in the roof over some of those areas that there was honey built up on the floor so much that you couldn't walk on it. So it's things like that. It's gotten overgrown, and we need to do, if we're going to have any real thought of having the Historic Society up there, it's going to impact our budget in terms of maintenance of the remainder of the hill to keep it reasonably safe.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this is Tom. Can I ask a question?
Yes, Councilor Sosi.
Yeah, Lars, could you jump forward to the next slide after this one? Yeah. So my question is around what the thinking is today. We got 9.2 million set aside for capital for next year, and I'm sure the vast majority of that is around the city center development. So what are we thinking as far as spending that money versus not spending that money in 2021, and how do we think about that?
I think we're going to spend very little of it unless something changes dramatically. But what we normally do is we'll go through this list of capital items and we'll talk about the prioritization or the things that have to happen before we want staff to go out and actually take the steps that are necessary for us to go to bid. ultimately, the council will control every dollar that's spent on capital because it has to go to bid, and then the bids have to come to council, and there has to be a contract awarded. So if we choose at some point in the process not to award the contract, then we won't spend the capital. So the council has ultimate control over what gets spent throughout the year on capital projects particularly. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Sosi, or not?
Yeah, it does. I guess my ultimate question is how, and maybe it's not something we can answer today or now, but how we think about whether or not we're going to go forward with that. Are there like things that if they happen, we go forward, and if they don't happen, we don't go forward? Or I guess that's my bigger question, and I don't know if it's an appropriate one for right now.
You know, as a general rule, what we have done is we have capital items, and I'll give you a good example was this year. We did not think when we were sitting in this spot a year ago that we were going to have a problem funding the wall along Litchfield Road. So that project has moved forward throughout the year with the various amounts of money being spent to do all the engineering work to get it to the point where now we can bid that project. So those funds were approved by the council, and those funds to get it ready for bid were spent as kind of the normal course. Now that the project is getting ready for bid, we're looking at it and saying, you know, maybe this isn't a great idea today. Maybe this should be postponed 6 months or 8 months so that we can get an idea of really where our finances are before we decide to spend this money. And maybe we let the construction area stabilize a little bit, because maybe the cost will actually go down some. So we do not need to go ahead and fund that now as a council, because we can choose not to do that. Going forward next year, it'll be slightly different in that we'll have a list of capital projects that will be prioritized. Some of those capital projects, we may as a council instruct staff to go ahead and do the work that's necessary to get it ready for bid. But before we go out to bid, we come back to council and talk about, do we really want to bid this? Let's take a look at our situation today, and we'll make that decision on whether we want to go forward with the bid. And then once we go forward with the bid, before we actually award the contract, we're going to have another conversation. So we've got different steps in there that, you know, they're kind of like gating steps so that we can control these capital funds, which are, you know, ultimately entirely electable kind of funds. We can elect to spend them or not spend them. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's continue.
Okay. So Mayor, would there be a later time, should we talk about whether you want to make a decision about these big items, or as we get into the departments, or what would you think?
I think it probably makes more sense department by department, only because the questions are going to be more specific, as opposed to not really overview questions, but more specific.
So the cost of living has been budgeted and the merit into each department. So as we review their budgets, you'll see under personnel, you'll see that increase. So just keep that in mind, as well as the health insurance increase.
It may be that we ought to talk about some of these ones that are not specific to a department. Go ahead and talk about them more in general. In terms of cost of living increases and merit increases, my feeling is that those need to be on hold until, again, we see what happens with this situation. You know, it's an entirely different answer if by September the economy is actually open for the most part. You know, it makes a big difference on whether our restaurants go back to some sort of, you know, they're not going to be normal, I'm sure, by September, but at least we're generating some revenue from them. And then the big question is what's going to happen with the resort. And the resort rooms may be able to get people who want to come stay in a room, but I'm wondering how it's going to work to have conventions and the kinds of activities that they have for their large groups, given, you know, social distancing and whatever. I think the answer is going to be tremendously different depending on whether we have vaccines that are available in the fall and whether or not we have some of these treatment, you know, regimens that actually prove to be effective. It makes it a lot easier for people to say, well, it's okay if I get this disease, and even if I'm in the 5% that react really badly to it, I'm not uncomfortable about that if I have a good treatment. It's hard to do that when right now we don't have a treatment that's even approved by, by the FDA for the, the disease at all. So I think, my opinion is that things like the cost of living increase and the merit increase needs to go on hold and be budgeted as contingency until we see what, how does this all shake out? We have too much unknown at this point. Other comments? Okay, I don't know how you take your direction from that.
Well, we can continue. Okay. So at this point, I'm ready to jump into department by department. We do have, I don't know, was it half an hour, 45 minutes left before the special meeting?
I thought the special meeting was, oh no, it's still at 6 o'clock. Yeah. All right, so yeah, we got an hour.
So I'm going to be referring to the packet that was distributed. So first I want to just cover the summary here. Wide, okay. All these pictures of people are covering up my screen. Hopefully y'all can see this. Zoom out just a little. There we go. So as we discussed, basically with the revised revenue projections, I'm putting it at flat as to what we budgeted for the current FY20 budget. So no real increases. There's some decrease in revenue. Yeah, and again, these are probably need to be looked at will need to be looked at as we progress through the fiscal year. But really what I wanted to show here is a summary department by department of changes. So you'll see that some are going up slightly and others are going down and some are significant. So like you said, we'll jump into each department to see what these changes are. Okay. So again, like last year, I prepared a summary of each department that separates personnel costs into a category, and then supplies and services are into a separate category, so you can see the difference. And then I've attempted to explain what those changes are. And we can link, from this packet, we can link to the line items if you'd like to see more detail. But for the city manager's budget, mainly all that's impacting here is the fact that we're budgeting the cost of living, merit, and the insurance. So 3% increase. Questions on city manager's budget?
Questions or comments? I don't see any hands.
Okay. The council and commission budget, you'll see quite a large increase in what this is basically moving of certain line items that were previously under the city clerk's budget into the council and commission's budget. And staff felt like these were more appropriately shown under the council and commission's type of department rather than they're previously in the city clerk's department. So here's the list of budgeted dues and memberships that make up that change. Westmark National League of Cities, Arizona League of Cities, Southwest Valley Chamber, Three Rivers Society, Maricopa Association of Government, and the Air Force Association. As you look at the line items, actually I'll jump in there just because you may be more interested about the council, that we've also separated the line items into more detail than there has been in the past for the council area. There's been some challenge in the past to kind of manage because everything was under one line item, that was the council miscellaneous line. So we've split that up into additional categories. Any questions about that?
Yes, Councilman, is it Donahue?
It's Brainerd.
No, Brainerd Watson.
Yeah. So the annual National League of Cities Conference, are we expecting that to happen this year?
I don't know. It's scheduled for August, so, and at this point, it's still in the schedule, but we haven't had an executive committee meeting which is where we'll discuss that. We haven't had that meeting yet. It'll be coming up, I guess this comes up in May. I'm not sure. I have to look at my calendar. We normally would have had one in April, but it got postponed, and now we're having a virtual one, and I think the virtual one is in a couple of weeks.
Oh, it will be virtual.
Yeah, well, not the league, but our league executive committee will meet virtually.
Yeah, because I'm anticipating
the next
that
week or so.
by August, probably not too many people are going to still be interested in getting together in large groups. And so maybe this might be a year that we forego or send only one of our Mohicans, and the rest of
Yeah, we may have less participation.
significant money out of our budget.
Oh, the other thing is it's at the Renaissance, which is just down the block, so it's likely we won't be staying there.
Yeah.
You know,
But still, I think even if you don't stay there, the member or the attendance is pretty expensive, isn't it?
To be honest, I don't know what the individual costs are, so I don't know. This is what we've been spending on average, is $1,200 a year. Is that?
These are actually dues
That's the
to these
70.
organizations.
Oh, that's the National League dues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we actually, the reason we're part of the reason we joined the National League was to get access to their grant program information, and also to get involved with this insurance program for water pipes and gas pipes. So we actually derive some revenue, and I don't know how much the offset is, but we derive some revenue from that insurance program. And we'd have to get report from staff in terms of how helpful the league information has been. It's a computer program, as I understand it, like a database. I don't know how helpful it's been in terms of applying for grants, but I believe that we have been using it for grant applications.
Yeah, I think I misspoke when I said national. I meant Arizona League of Cities.
And again, that's dues. Those are our dues. That looks too high for dues, to be honest, to the Arizona League, but
No, that's
it is that high. Yeah, so those are dues that it's just to be a member of the Arizona League.
I just, I'm looking at the bottom line that, maybe there's a way of not every one of us being on every organization, and maybe we can save. I know it's not much, but I think it says something to the community if we're willing to cut back on this area.
Well, in terms of dues that are paid to the Arizona League, those would be very difficult. But it would put our city in a very difficult spot if we weren't a member of the Arizona League. And the Arizona League brings us a lot of value for that money in terms of educational opportunities that are both for the council and for commissioners. It is all of our lobbying effort. The majority of the money that we allocate towards lobbying at the state legislature is done through the league. There's every year tremendous efforts put in by the league to protect the city's position through the legislative process. So that money would be very difficult for me to say it is discretionary. I think we have to be a member of the Arizona League. If you looked at something like Westmark, we could, if we weren't a member of Westmark, our life probably would not change. So that's one that would be harder to argue, although it's not very much money. The chamber, I think the chamber is the same as the league. The chamber does a lot of things for us in terms of the local businesses. It has become a relevant organization in economic development, and I think it would be a mistake for us not to be a member of the local chamber. Maricopa Associates and Governments, again, is another thing, we really don't have an option. It would be foolhardy for us not to be a member of MAG. We could eliminate Air Force Association and Three Rivers Historic Society, but again, it's such a small amount of money, I think it would be looked at by other cities with, they'd be wondering what's going on.
I just was wondering if like all the members of council are members, or, if there's just a membership.
These are all city memberships.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Okay, the next department on the list is the city clerk's department. Their budget overall is requested or has been budgeted at a 7% increase. A big chunk of that is under the personnel category. Their supplies and services, the big reason that's going down is, as I just mentioned, some dues and services, the dues that were just talked about under the city council were moved from this department up, so that's why that's going down. There is an increase next year for the, the general election publicity pamphlet that is published and mailed out. And then there's 3 salary adjustments that have been requested. One of them is the city clerk salary adjustment. Another is a request to change an admin assistant to a deputy city clerk. And they can see the hourly rate change. And then an admin assistant 1 to assistant, changing the title to assistant to council and city manager, and then with a corresponding salary increase. And with the deputy clerk, if we were to, move forward with changing one of the positions to deputy city clerk, there will be additional training and certifications necessary, and that is driving that conference and training category as well.
Question?
Yeah, I got to get back to my galley view here. Who has their hand up? Oh, Mr. Vice Mayor.
These requests for salary adjustments, are these being made by the city manager or by the clerk's office or by who?
These particular ones came directly from the city clerk. And she, I think, is in the room, so she could comment if you have a question for her.
I don't have audio on this, so
What's that?
I don't have audio on my computer.
No?
Can you hear me okay?
Can everybody hear the city clerk?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just speak up. Sounds like it's fine. This is the audio right here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get it closer to you.
For the reclassifications for the admin assistants, 1 to deputy city clerk, that's part of my, I just lost the word. Succession plan. State statute requires that there are certain certifications that the city clerk must have to perform elections and things like that. So when I retire, I want to make sure whoever I leave behind has those certifications. The assistant 1 to assistant to mayor, council, and city manager is just an increase in her workload. My request for my salary is I am the only department head who is not salary. I am still hourly. So my hours, of course, would increase. And it would be in line with other department head salaries.
Any other questions or comments, Mr. Vice Mayor or anyone else? All right, not seeing any hands, we'll go on to City Attorney.
And Mayor, if there are, I think as we move forward through the workshop, if there's something that council doesn't want to see in the budget, I think it'd be a good point to bring it up so that we can revise the budget to something that you're going to adopt. Just wanted to make that.
And I think, I mean, we're gonna end up going back through all of these, I think, again.
Okay.
And so I think the council's gonna need time to kind of chew on this a little bit before they, we'll know for sure what the reactions are gonna be.
Okay, fair enough.
Again, if there's any comments, who keeps changing this view?
I don't know.
You or
Mine-
you?
It's not me. Mine keeps changing as well.
It just has a mind of its own. So if there are any questions or comments, please hop in. Otherwise, we'll wait until next meeting. Councilman Stossy.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thanks. Just one comment and just a general comment on the process. I mean, I fully appreciate all the transparency as far as the detail that Lars is giving us, but I would just go back to a perspective I think I mentioned in the past. I really think as a council, we should be dealing with big picture stuff and not getting into individual details and tactics like we just are now. I think we should be thinking more in terms of, overall budgeting and or maybe budgeting totals by department. But I feel like we're sort of getting into the weeds if we're talking about individual line items on the budget. That's just my opinion.
And normally, I think we try to stay at a higher level. It becomes a little difficult with the city clerk because the city clerk technically works for the council, doesn't work for the city manager. So the council needs to make decisions in the clerk's office that are more, on a lower level, more granular than you might for the rest of the departments, where those departments are functions that are really the city manager's responsibility. Okay, let's go to the city attorney then.
The city attorney's budget, it's basically a contingent amount for the contract we have for the services. We're not projecting to increase or decrease that. It stayed at $150,000 over a very long time. And we believe that the budget capacity will be sufficient to cover any projects that the city has planned in the future. Looking at the trends, you can see that we spend around 85 and up to 100,000 for this current year. So I think we'll be fine there. Okay, then budget and finance department. Overall, there's a 6% decrease. There's several things in my area that have allowed us to decrease our budget. One of them is when we awarded the new contract for a financial auditor. There's a reduction in fees, so we were able to reduce that. We've also changed the contract with our sales tax auditor. That's Al Holler and Associates. Before that was, as if council remembers, a fixed fee per month. So it was $2,000 per month we would pay for his services. We revised that contract to be on a per audit basis. So that allowed us to basically cut that in half, and likely we won't even spend up to the $12,000 that we do have budgeted. I'm reducing the budget or the bank charges also with the new bank contract. Last year there was software upgrades budgeted, and those have been done, so next year we can reduce that amount. Again, the personnel budget slight increase. We've increased the line item for professional services, basically with me transitioning out and having the ability to have Pat Walker Consulting on contract. We've put a budget in there. The AZDOR admin fees, those are given to us basically by the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. That's a state mandated fee that we pay. And also increasing the IT contract from 15 to 20,000. We've seen that his services are needed more than we have in the past. Any questions on that?
Questions or comments? Okay. HR.
HR is decreasing by 8% or 28,000, mainly because of a turnover in your director position. We will continue to budget two positions in that department, an HR director and an admin assistant, even though currently it's vacant. Okay, any questions on HR?
Flips and it's on.
Okay.
Questions or comments? Nope, don't see any hands, I don't think. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, building safety. Basically, the increases in the personnel line item relating to our cost of living and merit, so there's not much there that I can point out other than that. Basically, status quo from the previous year.
So same thing for code enforcement?
In code enforcement, same thing. I wanted to point out that this current year, we budgeted for a full-time person, a full-time position. We're continuing to do that for the next fiscal year, even though currently that's being handled by another employee doing that in addition to their duties. So the estimated ending is far below what we budgeted, but we continue to budget for that for the next year, allowing the city manager to make a decision about that position.
So is that something we could actually put into a contingency in this area?
That is, yeah.
That would probably be a good one to do that on.
Especially if council wants, a hiring freeze or something of that nature. Then
Correct.
At the same time as bringing that position back for authorization to hire, we can have council authorize a budget adjustment for that area.
Right.
Make a note, okay. Okay, the planning services, you'll see a large decrease in this department. They're detailed down here, but essentially the last year's budget had $110,000 for city center planning. We've resolved that obligation to pay Destination LP this fiscal year, so we're proposing to decrease that line item down to, I think we're going to leave a little bit in there. Oh, it says we're leaving $4,000 in that line item to cover design review for city center projects.
Okay, questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any. Engineering.
Okay, engineering, you'll see, as I mentioned earlier this evening, we made an action mid-year this year through council to authorize hiring of an internal engineer, city engineer. That's why the budget's changing quite a bit from the previous year. We do envision needing continuing services from the contract city engineering firm as well. So the overall budget is increasing.
Is this increase in outside services, is it related mostly to city center?
I think if Woody's on the line, he could address the question.
I see a name, Woody. Woody, are you there?
He has to be unmuted.
I don't have the ability.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the engineering services for the city center project are included in the capital line item. So this is for miscellaneous non-capital items that pop up from time to time. For example, we may need to do some specialized engineering related to the structural design for the new view fence on the wall. I do have some money budgeted for that, but for the Camelback view fence. Also specialized plan review for traffic engineering issues, just a variety of things.
Okay, we may want to get a little bit more detail so we understand that just the variety of these lump sum areas. When dollars are tight, get a little bit questionable. But are there any other questions or comments from the council? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'm confused. Woody, are you an employee, a contractor, or what?
I'm an employee.
And you report as a department head to the council or to the city manager?
He's a city employee and reports direct to the city manager.
Got it. Okay. Full-time?
Part-time.
He is not full-time. It's up to approximately 30 hours a week, but he puts in a little more than that, but it's all for one salary, but he is not full-time, considered full-time.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Magistrate Court, looks like not much change.
Yep, for the magistrate court, basically they requested a status quo budget, slight increase for staff currently there for COLA and merit. They also were able to reduce a few line items. You'll notice that they do have some contingency there because of their caseload uncertainty. They like to have some budget available to handle that load.
Is the cost increase for the court rental is it in this department line?
Yes.
So it's in there? All right.
Yeah, I increased that for the new rental cost.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay, going on to public safety.
Okay, public safety, overall an increase of 9%, basically composing of our contracted services. We've already discussed those amounts previously. I also wanted to point out that I'm recommending we budget $1,000 for the posse equipment reimbursement. That was direction given this past fiscal year from council that we would allow the posse to submit for reimbursement for some of their equipment. And we didn't have a budget this year, so I'm requesting or suggesting that we would put a number in there, and whatever the council feels comfortable with, we can adjust that number if needed.
Questions?
I have a question. So I know at some, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, at some point, we talked about maybe increasing the contract with the sheriff, that we would indeed add more time since we appear to have more population, more crime. Is that still something we're talking about?
To the extent that we started those conversations, they didn't continue. And given the uncertainty we have with budgets now, it probably isn't something that is going to be real, have a lot of appetite for. One of the problems, and again, I mean, you can just, I think, just from a common sense standpoint, if we went from one deputy going around Litchfield Park every 24 hours a day, if we went to 2 deputies, we're not going to increase the coverage in any significant manner that's going to impact the safety of your street or my street or Ron's street. Since those are all the same street, we should have more coverage probably, but we don't.
Secret Service.
Right. But it just doesn't, I mean, if you think about it, the whole area of public safety is a lot more complicated than the question of should we have 3/4 of a beat or 1 beat or a beat and a half. I mean, those changes are not going to directly relate to, is the burglary that happened going to last month, is it going to happen again this month? So we can certainly continue the conversation, and we can put together a work study session if there's enough support on council to talk about it. But I think the answer to that question ends up being a lot more complicated than just whether you have part of another quarter of a beat of an officer. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Keep in mind too, that in order for us to make a contract change, we have to do it on April 15th or before. So what that means is that they might welcome us adding to this and paying more. I don't know, but again, our contract says that if we're going to make any adjustment or change, we have to do it by April 15th of each year.
All right. So, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I was surprised by Lars' comment that there wasn't anything in the budget for the posse last year, because I've watched this posse number every year. Maybe we've dropped it last year, but we've always had something in there for the posse. And they're probably the greatest bang for the buck that we get for our police enforcement. So, the $1,000 number I have no problems with, but if they come back and need more, I think we should really seriously consider giving them more if they come back and need it. Every year we've budgeted for the posse in the past. I don't think there's been a year where they've actually used all of what we budgeted. So I'd be surprised if they came back and chewed up this $1,000, but if they do, I would be open to looking at what they want more money for and pretty favorably considering it.
Duly noted. Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we'll go on to Public Works.
Okay, this budget is showing a 12% increase. A big chunk of that is in the personnel. We've already talked about the fact that there's been a request for 2 full-time employees. One would be a maintenance tech 1. The other is equipment and facilities maintenance tech. And then, of course, they're a large department with 16 employees, so the cost of living, merit, and insurance does hit this area quite a bit. I don't know if you want me to go through each line by line, or if there's any particular questions in each one of these. I think Richard is available.
It might be best just to go through and see if there are questions about any of these line items. Do we have questions from the council?
Yeah, I have a question.
Who is it?
John?
Is it Councilman Romack?
Yes.
Oh, yes or no? Who is it?
John.
Councilman Romack, yes? Okay.
My question would be the status of the fire station / public works building. I don't see anything in here for that, and yet we $7,000, but I don't know what the plan is on that building. We've known that we were going to end up with it for quite some time, and it looks to be that it's pretty rough shape. I just wondered, is there a long-term plan for that? And if so, there's nothing in this budget.
Mr. City Manager.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Lars, do we have that budgeted in the CIP?
Yes, I believe this current year we have $50,000 budgeted for the public works yard. And also there's some money allocated for next year as well. I don't remember the amount, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I believe in anticipating taking over the building and not having COVID-19, so we had availability to do a lot of things. We anticipated doing part of the improvements in this fiscal year, and it would roll over into the next fiscal year and finish the improvements in the next fiscal year. So we have in fact budgeted for it. It's just been delayed as a result of, one, the Metro Fire Department needed to extend out till, I think it was, I want to say the end of March. And so we've finally gotten the building, and we are now beginning to look at it, because we didn't have total access to the building initially until they moved out. We need to do things like put doors on the garage so we can store equipment in there and keep it secured. We're trying to get estimates on that. Eventually, we're going to have to potentially do bids, et cetera, as we try to figure out how to renovate the building. But we have money budgeted. In addition to that, of course, Brian Goodman left. And so my number 2 guy, Richard, has kind of stepped in and he's trying to figure out what Brian was doing. But again, we have money budgeted and we're just taking a look at the structure itself and the availability of being able to get somebody here to start doing work. I don't know if we're going to get anything done this fiscal year, but we're certainly hoping to do something and then move it into the next fiscal year.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilman Clare, do you have a comment, or is that your hand just going up in the air? All right, am I muted? Okay,
Can you hear?
go ahead.
The 2 personnel requests, is that based on need at this point or projected need with City Center and other projects going on? And if it's not actual need right now, do we still need both people to be added?
Mr. City Manager.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Clare, to answer the question, the 2 bodies are for different reasons. The one additional body is to help with the maintenance that we anticipate when we begin to try and keep and maintain and groom La Loma, the hill. And the second body is Brian Goodman was also a mechanic, and he did a lot of our minor mechanical work on some of our equipment that we had. And so we didn't have to farm it out to a higher expensive retail. Instead, he did the work. Now, bigger items, we did send out to garages to have them fixed, but the smaller items, he took care of them himself. We don't have anyone on staff to do that or replace that. So 1, we can hire someone to do that, or 2, we can send it out. Now, it sounds easy to send it out because there's a cost, but that cost also includes the fact that the equipment will be lost for a period of time, and that will slow down the schedule and prevent our guys from keeping the pace, and which will then possibly cause additional complaints about how parks look and so on. So I'm trying to balance all of that so I can stay on pace and keep everything looking good, at the same time keeping our equipment functioning and having enough personnel to well, the other addition would be the Camelback Baseball Park to groom that and then groom the hill as well. So that's what those 2 positions are.
Understand. As a follow-up question then, so we have a line item, basically 1 person with a significant amount of their work to go to La Loma, and we have a $50,000 increase on the La Loma maintenance. So in reality, we have $115,000 additional beyond, if we're thinking about one of those people is the majority of their time is dealing with the Loma plus the increase on the Loma?
Well, the increase on the Loma is not salary. The salary would be for the person who works and gets paid.
Understand.
The increase.
But I'm just looking at total expenditures.
The increase is because we originally budgeted $15,000 to try and pay for some grooming. The additional $50,000 now to make it $100 is because we're expected, with the potential opening of the museum, to keep the hill looking way better than it does. We're almost supposed to groom it like it's a park. And I'm gonna almost need a guy there, at least 1, if not 2, on a semi-regular basis to keep things groomed and clean and policed up, et cetera.
Understand. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll go on.
The next department, actually, it's Public Works continuing, but under the restricted HERF fund. For ongoing operating purposes, we budgeted $100,000 this next year. So that's things like striping, pothole replacement, various smaller type projects on our street maintenance is charged to this budget. We historically haven't been spending up to that level, so it's just been reduced slightly to $100,000. Our street light districts, overall, the electricity costs are actually going down. I think it's I didn't get a chance to look into it, but I believe it's related to switching out more efficient light fixtures. Okay, and then under recreation services, I've added a couple lines here as well as the personnel and supplies budget lines. One is the program revenue, so you can see what the projected revenue is for that department and how that will cover its costs for the next budget year and current year. So with program closures, we're definitely not going to meet the target, unfortunately, of the 50% target. There was basically a third quarter of this, the fourth quarter of this fiscal year with no revenue. The overall supplies and services for the next budget year are projected flat. The increase in the budget is basically related to the 2% merit, 2% COLA. We are expecting a decrease in our revenue next year being, and feel free to jump in anytime, any of the staff members that have more information, but my understanding is the aquatic season is projected to be closed for this summer, and that spans 2 fiscal years. So half of it will impact current fiscal year, half of it will impact the next fiscal year. Any questions on the rec center?
Comments from the council? Don't see any.
Mr. Mayor, John Romack.
John Romack.
Hey, you're talking about closing the pool only because of what the governor's mandate is, or is there something more to it?
I would like to defer that to either Matthew Williams or City Manager Bill Stevens.
Gentlemen, who wants to speak?
I'll try to speak to that, sir. Councilmember Romack, currently all commercial pools have been ordered closed by the order of the governor. That has not changed yet. We certainly hope that it does. We are planning at this time, hopefully, to open this summer for what we call open swim, where the public can come and swim, and also to do water aerobics. A big part of the pool revenues are normally swim lessons and what we call Legardos, which is competitive swim. We are not planning to do either one of those this summer because the swim lessons, we don't think people want kids spitting in each other's faces and the lifeguard's face, that kind of thing, even if the pool does reopen. At this time, we're very open. We're very open in the air about what's going to happen with the pool. We're planning for multiple open dates so we can be ready whatever happens, whether that be June 1, June 15th, or July 1, because we just don't know at this time. Because it's going to be a question of social distancing. As you might imagine, it's very hard to social distance in a pool. We're not real sure how we're going to do that, to be honest, but we're kind of in a holding pattern to wait and see what's going to happen with that. But if the pool does open at all this summer, it would be just for open swim and for water aerobics.
Okay, so that's, Matthew, thank you. Basically, this is going to be a call by the governor then, not here locally.
That's correct, sir.
I just can't see us keeping that pool as big and as nice as that pool is now and everything that we spent on it to keep that closed for any longer than is absolutely necessary.
Absolutely. We had planned to open it May 23rd before anybody ever heard of COVID-19, but now we're just in a holding pattern to wait and see.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments or questions? Oh, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Do we have an idea of what the fixed expenses are for operating the pool if it doesn't open versus the expenses if we do open it, and how this would affect the budget? I mean, we've usually funded the rec program 300, 400, 500, sometimes closer to 600,000 a year, and the biggest expense has always been the pool. We have, Lars, do you have a feeling for where we'd be if we didn't, if we had, no revenue and continued on with the expenses of keeping the pool maintained?
I think I would have to look at the line items, and perhaps we could research that and give that to you for the next workshop. Otherwise, Matthew, do you have any input on that?
I would have to run the numbers on that. I wouldn't want to try to guess off the top of my head. Obviously, your biggest expenses would be personnel, benefits, and of course, chemicals for the pool. We have to keep chemicals. We have to keep the pool full year round, even if it doesn't open at all. So there would be no revenues whatsoever. It would just be staff cost and chemical cost for utilities. But we could certainly get those numbers and get back with you for the next meeting, sir.
Yeah, and my second question would be, is there, if you open the pool just for the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, trying to find the staff to maintain it, to operate it, is that even feasible?
We have staff currently on board that can maintain the pool as always. The maintenance would not be the issue. As far as lifeguards, what we're currently doing is in the pool, usually we have rehires, returning lifeguards, or we have new lifeguards. For this year, we're planning for almost all rehires. So that way they don't have to go through as much training because they won't be doing as much. They'd be more public swim. But that would be the answer. Maintenance wouldn't be the issue, but lifeguards, it would be a question of at what point is it enough revenue? Yeah, exactly. I hope that the pool gets to open for July and August. We had also talked about extending it until September. Normally it closes when school starts back, but we could certainly extend it to later on in the summer if we chose to.
Can I just, as a sidebar, New York has already said that their pools will be closed all summer long. So I wouldn't be surprised to see our governor follow suit.
It could happen. I certainly hope that's not the case. I would imagine that would drastically affect the hotels, especially in Phoenix and Tucson with the heat, because a lot of people come there, of course, for the pools. So I hope that's not the case, but we'll certainly see what happens. I know we're all kind of on pins and needles waiting to see.
What I was getting at, Matthew, is the pool expenses out of our budget, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to operate the pool. And I'm trying to get a handle as if it's open or not open. What's the difference in the bottom line to the city? And I don't know, because you got the fixed cost versus the variable cost. I don't know how they all work out.
Right. I think we can definitely show. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we'll take a look. We'll do an analysis of that and get it to the council before the next work session.
Well, and maybe a backup plan so that we have an understanding if maybe we're in the last 3 weeks of the season or 4 weeks of the season. Does it make sense to open it for that last 4 weeks? Is there a certain cost of opening it up? It's going to cost us, a significant amount versus just, letting it go 3 or 4 weeks without being open. So.
I think what you're going to see is that it's an offset between how much revenue will this thing generate based on the assumptions you have on operations versus the cost of lifeguards. And that's really the main variable cost that's going to pop in is lifeguards. The rest of our costs in terms of chemicals and staff to maintain the the area over there are probably fixed.
Yeah.
But we can certainly calculate it easily enough and see what the impact is.
Certainly could. We'll be glad to look into that and get back to you, sir.
So you've got us in this budget, Lars, 477,000 is the amount that we
the subsidy.
Seeking revenues for the rec center.
It's the subsidy, correct?
Yeah.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, any other questions or comments? I don't see any hands, so yes.
There's 2 departments left and we have 10 minutes, so we did?
Yeah.
So we'll cover these very quickly and then we'll continue the next workshop. The community services area is going down slightly. That's mainly because the city line expenses will be going down with the new RFP that was done to save money on printing costs. And then the special events area. revenue is projected to go up next year, with the Oktoberfest going from $8,000 to $15,000 in revenue, and then Native American Arts Festival from $53,000 to $55,000. You'll see a big uptick in the personnel costs, and part of that is the COLA and merit, but the other part is we're budgeting next year, and we started doing it this year as well, but when public works staff works at the special event, they're typically on overtime over the weekend, and we started charging those staff costs to the special events area just to get a full cost picture on what's happening for that expense. So that's a big chunk of that 19,000. I believe it was $6,000 is what we put in there.
This is an area obviously that is tremendously uncertain what's going to happen. Whether we're going to have an Oktoberfest or not is, it's debatable. So this whole area is one that I would be shocked if it comes out anything like what's in this budget, just because I don't think we can foresee it. But
It's very true. The other thing I wanted to point out is even though we've been budgeting at 85% cost recovery for FY20 this current year, we're actually projecting to recover much more than that. It's partly because of the way budgeting is a expenditure cap, and typically we spend under, and we over deliver on revenue, so it's trending at in the mid to high 90s in cost recovery, which is a plus. And as you mentioned, next year is going to be an unknown with what can be held as far as events.
I would ask the city manager to take a look at these fixed costs, which I assume mainly are personnel, and try to understand what are you going to do with these people if we don't really have a rec season. What are they going to do if we're not planning events and running events? So how do you integrate them into your other staff, and how does their if you're going to keep them on the payroll, which I assume you want to do, then how does that impact any other needed changes in personnel that are in this budget? Any other comments or questions from anybody on the council? Okay, we need to log out of the system so we can get logged back in for the next meeting. So we need to adjourn this. I think the biggest question that still needs to be answered, and we need input from council on how you want to proceed, is whether you want items like personnel, merit, and other changes in costs, whether there's a merit increase or a cost of living increase, those types of somewhat discretionary line items. Do you want those in as a contingency, or so that the city manager needs to come back and talk to us as he needs to use or desires to use that contingency, or do you want to budget it as part of the line item budget and just see what happens? So we don't need to decide this today, but we're going to need to decide it next week. So please think it through and be ready to give us your idea of how you want to handle it going forward. Other than that, I don't know if I don't think we need. What's that?
Quick comment.
Sure, go ahead.
To Lars here real quick. In these tough times, professionalism really shines and shows, and Lars, you're shining and showing it. I really appreciate you working on this budget and what you've done.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I second that. Bravo.
We got through all the departments. So next workshop, we'll, like the mayor said, we'll talk about overall what we'd like to do, and then also the capital plan will be on the next agenda. Thank you so much.
Okay. We are adjourned. You can log off and log back on. What's that? You need a motion?
Do we need to log off, log back on?
Okay. We have to have a motion to adjourn. Who wants to make the motion? Come on, somebody make a motion.
Brainerd.
Claire, second. All right. all those in favor, I can see everybody now, so all those in favor just say aye.
Aye.
I like Rostosi's eye the best. Aye. Like going with that glad hands. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll get it back together here in just a minute.
Did you want us to log off, Tom, or are we going to stay logged on and then